Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
As we sit and reflect on the movie of the moment, Dunkirk, and as we mark the 100th anniversary of Passchendaele, one of the worst battles of British history, it is possible to be optimistic about the state of the world or deeply pessimistic. Optimistic because we've not been involved in a conflict on the scale of the First or Second World Wars for over 70 years. We've lived through an era of great moderation. But economists used that term, great moderation, just before the financial crash. The quiet can foretell the storm. And it is hard not to look at world affairs right now without concern, whether it is the conflicts that have erupted in the Middle East, the deteriorating relationship between Russia and the US, or the potential for a North Korean nuclear-armed ballistic missiles to strike the West. Is it time to worry? Passchendaele from the sky after the battles of the First World War. Just 80 miles from Britain, a scene of total devastation of the kind that most of us have not experienced. Today, the shape of Passchendaele is unmistakably the same, yet it is now just a pleasant Belgian village. Proof the world can escape the darkness of the past. And yet new darkness can come. The world today is undeniably in a volatile and brutal phase.
We'll handle North Korea. We're going to be able to handle it. It will be handled. We handle everything. Thank you very much.
No one has worked out a way to deal with the clear and present danger of North Korea, a country led by a single-minded dictator with nuclear weapons. This weekend he tested another ballistic missile, fired it in the direction of Japan and railed against the US. Is this the most foreseeable way to imagine 1 million or more people dying right now? Making for an unstable backdrop, the jostling of global powers. Trump blames China for not dealing with North Korea and has new problems with Putin. Each leader has something to prove. The world struggles for an equilibrium. Vice President Mike Pence was in Estonia today.
No threat looms larger in the Baltic states than the spectre of aggression from your unpredictable neighbor to the east.
The Cold War was, of course, in a sense, simple. What do I mean by that? That you had two great blocs, the Warsaw Pact on the one hand, NATO on the other. Where does that compare to today? It's not so simple. It's much more complicated. There are more actors on this difficult stage, and therefore it is, in my view, more difficult to handle.
For those in Syria, this probably already feels like the end of days, a conflict that's already lasted longer than World Wars I or II. The medieval violence of so-called Islamic State adds to the sense of desperation. It can't kill on a nuclear scale, but has taken terror well beyond its own territory. And Syria is just one conflict in a region that's fraught with explosive potential.
First, you have to know what happens when an atomic bomb explodes.
Of course, in the nuclear age, there have been periods in the past where we felt the end is nigh. Usually, human beings are capable of stepping back from the brink. But the danger is where one thing leads to another, as it did before the First World War. One problem triggers the next. Reaction leads to overreaction.
Care must be taken to ensure that what is relatively minor does not, either by some intent somewhere or by accident, grow into something more serious and more threatening.
A BBC war game exercise last year managed to arrive at a scenario of tactical nuclear weapons being used in Europe.
The Americans have decided not to take our advice and have used a tactical nuclear weapon to take out a target in Russia.
I mean, for Putin actually to apologize...
It would be nice to dismiss such outcomes as television talk, not the real world. But the worrying thing is that the years of peace in Europe have been historical exception rather than the norm. Well, let's reflect on how serious the threats to the West, to the world are. James Jeffrey was Deputy National Security Advisor and a US Ambassador to Iraq. He's in Washington. Brian Lord was the Deputy Director of GCHQ, responsible for intelligence and cyber operations. He's in Bristol. And with me here is Patricia Lewis, a nuclear physicist and arms control expert who's the Research Director for International Security at Chatham House. I'd like to start, and Patricia, maybe you can help me, do you see a possibility of what one might call a big war between major powers in the world in the next 20, 30 years?
Yes, I do. And I see it as a possibility if we don't learn the lessons of history. So the bad news is that it's very complicated, and there are two major hotspots and there are other smaller ones. We never know what will tip it off, but the good news is that we can learn from history. We do know what's happened before, and we've learned a great deal since the end of World War II. The UN, all of its structures around it has helped us prevent conflict. We know almost everything we need to do to prevent conflict. It's a question of having the political will to do it.
And I mean, to people like me who just think it's inconceivable because we're too sensible now to do these kind of silly things and to let one thing lead to another and to trigger a war when we would surely sit down and just sort it out.
That's not what human beings do, is it? Right. I mean, if you look through history, you know, people make mistakes. People get angry. They often misinterpret. We've seen many occasions where something's happened and then there's been an overreaction.
Overreaction. Well, James Jeffrey, I'm interested in, do you basically agree with what Patricia has just said there?
Only partially. The reason we haven't seen a return to the first half of the awful 20th century is that during and after World War II, the United States and European partners, added by countries around the world since then, have created a global collective security system with financial, trade, rule of law, and other aspects. But at the center is collective security that won the Cold War and was dealing with regional problems such as Saddam and Milosevic since 1989. Now, however, we see the rise of Russia and China who want to challenge that system and to some degree are cooperating with regional actors such as North Korea and Iran. The whole complex of threats taken together is quite formidable. Sorry,
so you're saying that you kind of would link the different things, the sort of the North Korea situation, the jostling between the big powers, these are all linked in your view? I mean, you think there's almost not a conspiracy against the West, but that people are organizing with a mind to weakening the West?
There's no overall battle plan that Beijing and Moscow have agreed on. They have commonality of interest in undercutting this American security system because it stands in the way of their alternative system, which you people in Europe understand from the 19th century. It's great powers expanding their influence until they run into another great power. That's exactly what led to World War I and World War II. Thus, we've tried over the past 70 years to find a different way forward. They're now challenging that, and that's, even though they don't coordinate on every single issue, there's a high degree of commonality in their UN votes to block action against North Korea or Iran, and in the way that, be it the South China Sea or be it the Baltics, they challenge this order.
Brian Lord, you better tell us whether you believe a kind of a big war is a possibility or whether you're on the more optimistic end.
I think a single big war is highly unlikely. I think what we are seeing, I think I would agree that what we are seeing is a challenge of traditional Western approach to the world. But what we also are living through a world is where the rigidity of borders is being broken down by technology, trade, communication. The availability of information is now no longer as controlled as it has. As you say, we have an increasingly bellicose North Korea. We've got Russia playing its normal geopolitical political games, whether that is in virtual real space, whether it's in cyberspace. And we have a White House which is, at the very least, perceived from the outside to be unusual and certainly unpredictable. What I would say is the risk of a miscalculation is extremely real. And a miscalculation is probably, in effect, has the same effect as a real conflict.
And Patricia made that point as well, so it's worth bearing in mind. Of course, war may itself be very different, and so as an expert on cybersecurity, one of the things we need to think about is not thinking about what it looks like in 20th century terms, but potentially is cyber the kind of the way, the form it takes in the 21st century?
I don't think it's as binary as that. I think what you have is you have the ability for states to be able to use activity online to be able to exert geopolitical effect all the way through to destructive effect. I think one of the areas for miscalculation is we're looking at an area of the world where there are still no rules of engagement. The ability to confuse is still very high. The ability to hide or deceit or put whoever's fingerprints you want on activity is very high. The lack of understanding by a public about what a cyber attack means, the lack of understanding of an adversary's capability in a way which is different from conventional capability, all plays into this confusion, which if people want to make a miscalculation or want to give the impression of making a miscalculation, just continues to increase the risk.
Patricia, to me, it would look like North Korea is in a different category to all the other risks, more than the Middle East, because North Korea, there's an unaccountable dictator. It's not even like the former Soviet Union. It's not like there's a system of which he's a part. He is just what he wants to be, right? And he's got nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles.
Well, he's not the only one with nuclear weapons, and he actually doesn't have them yet. He has the ballistic missiles, but as far as we're aware, he's not yet got to the point where he can mate the missiles with the warhead, or at least we hope not. Right. So there's still a bit of time to play for there. He is different. North Korea is different as a country. It doesn't have any friends. It has many enemies, and they're very unpredictable. We can't understand what they're going to do. But I would say now in the Middle East it's very unpredictable, and we have the West coming up against Russia in front to front. Right in the middle of a battle space. And as Brian said, it's got cyberspace in there as well. It's another set of tools. We have turmoil in the Middle East, in the Gulf. We have Israel still. Don't forget that. You know, it's a very potent
And
mix.
all of these could be the Serbias and the triggers for things. James Jeffrey, I'm just interested in your take on North Korea, because do you see it as slightly different to some of the other risks? Because the potential for massive harm is there if they get the final formula for nuclear weapons?
It is the most immediate crisis, and it is very, very dangerous because it does have nuclear weapons, and it can at least strike with nuclear and conventional weapons the civilian population of South Korea. So yes, it's special. On the other hand, it's not something in and of itself, say like Saddam's Iraq or Milosevic's Serbia, 10, 15 years ago. This is a country that is enabled by China. I disagree it doesn't have friends. Its long-range missiles are now mobile, which is very threatening because they're on Chinese trucks. Those trucks are not something they had 30 years ago. They're recent additions. The Chinese are enabling in many different ways the North Koreans basically to use them as a chess piece against the United States and the Western Pacific. And that's a real danger to us and to the entire region, including ultimately the Chinese.
Okay, we need to leave it there, all of you. Thank you very much indeed. Plenty to worry about.